Good morning, chess fans, broadcasting to you from my basement man cave along the banks of the muddy, mighty Mississippi River. Here in the state of Missouri, the Show Me State, I'm working my way through the chess.com bots, having started with the Advanced Series and the 1500 level. And now I have worked up to the 1900 level where I'm going against Miquel from Brazil, who chess.com has programmed to be a balanced player with little or no weaknesses, apparently. I am continuing my usual opening here, my system, the Max Murray system, which is 1d4 pathers, it's 1d4. I play the first 5 moves against every setup black may try, regardless. I play d4, e3, knight f3. Well, let's do it in order. d4, knight f3, then e3, then bishop e2, then castles. However, I will vary from my opening setup if black forces me to, as it did with this pawn exchange. I've learned that the best response to a Benoni opening is not the usual and orthodox, the best response in terms of my setup, not the best theoretical response, which is d4, d5 bypassing. So when black played 1c5, white had the option of simply advancing the d pawn to d5, and that is the usual way to play against the Benoni. A Benoni, a rather dubious opening, so I'm surprised Miquel is playing it if he's supposed to be this hot shot. Knight on c6, very often against these lower rated bots, has been part of a plan to assail my dark squares on the queen side, followed up by moves even as wild as queen to e7, forming a battery on the file, or a5, and that has been a sore spot. I've studied it throughout against these bots. It has I've been experimenting with controlling my dark squares by playing c3 and switching to a Colley style system featuring an early e4, or an eventual e4, I should say. But I've also learned from my study that I can simply play a3 at the appropriate time, and that thwarts a lot of, very simply thwarts a lot of black's evil designs for the dark squares on my queen side. The obvious drawback to a move like a3 is it takes time and it doesn't develop a piece, and it is a rather slow creeping move very far on the side of the board. But I'm going to continue in regular fashion. Now that bishop has come to I call it the anti-Colley bishop, it's come to the f5 square. You can notice that it is targeting my c2 pawn. Against these bots, they have been trying this fried liver style attack against my c2 pawn, and that is what's caused me to move the target and control this b4 square. It doesn't seem like much now, does it? But when black starts playing to dominate the dark squares, it becomes, if black invests so much in dominating my dark squares on my queen side, I must respond. I can't just let it go and pretend like it's nothing. This knight is even strong sometimes when it's blocking the c-pawn, but you can see Miquel, in his infinite wisdom in the CPU, has liquidated his c-pawn, so this knight on c6 is not blocking a pawn, and he will certainly bring the rook to the c-file, adding further pressure to my c2 pawn and suggesting again that perhaps the best development here is c2, c3, and not a3, which I'm thinking about at the moment. Notice my dark squared bishop, thanks to the central pawn exchange. My dark squared bishop has its natural diagonal running from the c1 square to the h6 square for development. I don't have a lot of approval, though, for these kinds of setups for white. Moving the pawn to c3 will prevent my knight from coming to its strongest square. In my system, c4 is usually where I want to put my c-pawn, and then I'll develop the knight to c3. In this case, though, if I play c4, I will have to accept an isolated queen pawn. In general, I am not unhappy doing so. You have to learn to play both for and against the isolated queen pawn. You need to, it's like the bomb, you have to give up fearing the bomb and love it. It's the same with the isolated queen pawn. You have to give up fearing an isolated queen pawn and learn to love it, because it does, particularly in the opening when there's lots of material, provide outposts in the center or on key squares, and a lot of dynamicism. For instance, the rooks with an isolated queen pawn are usually played on either side of it, because those files will be half open, or in this case open, or almost in this case open. Now, the normal move here for me in my system is 00. I'd like to play that on move 5, but I had to consume an additional move with the recapture in the center. And now I have this, and I'm going to put it in air quotes, threat of knight b4 with an attack on my c2 pawn. Of course, the defense for that is knight a3, but a knight on the rim is grim and dim. The knight on c3 would support the advanced c2, c4 should I play it. So this is an interesting moment for me, because now I'm going to have to decide between a2, a3, and c2, c3, and I have not studied this precise position yet, despite having played hundreds of games. I've not looked deeply into this precise position where black is going to work up a fried liver type attack against my c pawn in the absence of his own c pawn. These previous attacks with the lower rated bots have come with a pawn on c7. If I play c3, black can, of course, sacrifice what is sometimes referred to as the small exchange or the minor exchange of a bishop for a knight. Theoretically, white would benefit because a bishop in many positions on chess is considered just ever so slightly stronger than a knight. I have my own ideas about that. We won't get into it. I'm not going to castle because I just don't want to deal with this. And I don't want to put my knight on a3. If I play c3, then I'll have to play knight to d2, which interrupts the development of my dark squared bishop, which may need to come. So I may have to play c3 if I go that way, then bishop f4, which is a nice diagonal, and I'll get there first. It'll take black time to impede that diagonal. On the other hand, if I play a3, then there's no potential exchange against my knight. There's no attack against my c-pawn until he brings his rook. So it looks like the c-pawn is going to have to go forward based on the Benoni opening that black used. I need to blunt this half-open file. The pawn is supported. Here is my pawn chain. Then, instead of the usual Max Murray opening system with this Yusupov-Rubinstein approach, where I go to the queen side, this real strength of my opening system's attacks on the queen side. Instead of that, I'm going to be aiming at the king side, and we'll have to see whether black even castles over there. So far, these bots have not been very good. In fact, they've been rubbish at protecting their kings with early castling. It's going to be c3. c3, Patzer, c3. That's how we're going to play here. This is 1900 bot. I'm going to get a real game, no doubt. Black now picking on a potentially weak pawn or square, a weak square for me, the e4 square. There is also a development opportunity for the black queen to come to b6 and target my b2 pawn, which kind of prevents me easily from moving my bishop away to a developmental square such as f4. I will most likely just move the target again, and now I will have a more serpentine arrangement of pawns on my queen side, but notably the pawn on c3 will be backward, as you will, or adjacent, not being able to be defended by another pawn. So I don't want to do this, meaning I don't want to move my bishop, meaning I probably want to put my knight on d2, and if Black Miquel from Brazil decides to kerplunk his pony on my e4 square, well, I can exchange that. Knights are my nightmare, no pun intended, or pun is intended. I play very poorly against knights that are posted up on my side of the board and defended by pawns. I play very poorly. But the move that I really want to play right now, prior to any of these, is 00 to get my king to safety, and I will play that. That is the last move in my system. It's occurring here on move 7 due to distractions. Normally I have that accomplished on move 5. So the normal pattern of development in the Max Murray system, also known as the Yusupov-Rubinstein perhaps, is 1 d4, 2 knight f3, 3 e3, 4 moving the bishop to e2, which is the distinguishing move, and then 5 00. Black has moved his queen to d6. One of the reasons that works is because I don't have a knight on the c3 square and can't get it to the b5 square, where this queen would be a target and could be pushed around. I sometimes get my queen to d3 in my opening system by playing a delayed collie bishop to the d3 square, and when the anti-collie bishop trades itself off, my queen comes herself to d3. It's a very strong square on the white side, and with a pawn on c3, black cannot hamper her. The question now becomes, how do I develop? Note the queen on d6. I said I would get to the f4 square first, but I can't now because there is a queen there. I could play a computer-like move, queen to d2, quote-unquote threatening to play queen to f4, and then after the exchange of queens, I would get free development of my bishop to the diagonal where it wants to go. However, black will respond to this arrangement by playing e6 and just keeping his queen based on the d6 square against a queen exchange. Also, moving the queen to d2 violates certain opening principles. I have not yet got the minor pieces out, which you usually want to do. The opening principle is don't bring the queen out early in the opening because she can get pushed around, or in this case it actually blocks the squares that my pieces are competing to develop to, which is d2. So I'm going to play here knight to d2. Should I just try to blunt this? See, this is a very, I don't want to spend forever talking about this. I have so much talk in the last video about these principles and concepts. It does help me to give stream of consciousness right now as I look at a fresh position. This is the anti-collie bishop. If I oppose it with my light square bishop, I will lose a powerful attacking piece, but so will black. And I will bring my queen to d3, which is, as I mentioned, supported as she is by a pawn on c3 to prevent being harassed by black's knight, is a good square for her. She comes into contact with the e4 square, not able to occupy it herself, obviously, because the pawns and minor pieces are fighting that battle right now, but she will support activity on that square from the white knight and down that half open diagonal, which is where the rook wants to go. The f1 rook already clamoring, asking to be put on the e1 square to oppose this king. An interesting question is whether Miquel will castle queenside. The last spot I played, an 1800er, did in fact castle queenside. The position, just like this one, was a bit loose on the queenside, and the computer solved that by shuffling his king towards the a8 square. It didn't help. I was able to get pressure down the c file. Not an analogous position right now. The issue black is really having here is what to do with his dark squared bishop. It is an issue that has plagued these bots from when I started playing them at the 1500 level. Remember, sometime these bots are actually developing the queen to the e7 square after they move the e pawn, further blocking the bishop in and leading with what I call their chin, the queen. So if I play here, black can switch things up and now go for the annoying Patzer pin with bishop g4, but then he has surrendered a very good diagonal from b1 to h7 to my light squared bishop, which could participate on the king side's attack, which is what, frankly, I'm looking at first here, due to the fact that my pawns are pointing to the king side, and every Russian schoolboy knows you attack in the direction your pawns are pointing. The pin can be met by h3. Yes, I create a hook by moving a pawn in front of my king, which is a violation of opening principle. But on the other hand, I harry this bishop, so I do it with tempo, and I create a trap door for my king to evacuate the last rank, preventing last rank mates, which do eventually become threats at some point. Another possible idea is to play my bishop from the Patzer pin itself, although there's nothing being pinned, and actually just simply exchanging this knight off. That takes a lot of pressure off my e4 square. This other knight not able to get to that outpost without making 3 moves due to the geometry here. Knights take 3 moves to move diagonally, in this case from the c6 square to the e4 square. The computer would hate this if I played it. I would be removing a defender of the b2 pawn. However, the queen has given up immediately the opportunity to come to b6 and worry that pawn. I do have to worry about myself, about developing my own queen. She can't come to her natural development square on c2 due to the presence of this light squared bishop. But she does have, and I have not been experimenting with it very much, she does have the b3 square attacking the b7 pawn, which black weakened by moving away his light squared bishop. It is a common ploy seen in such openings as the queen gambit to bring the queen out and attack this pawn. Black may defend that pawn by castling queenside. If black castles queenside now, well, there's not a rook on the c file, so the computer did not get a rook to the half-open file. The pawn is protected by the king, still a rather precarious situation, and the king being on c8 prevents the light squared bishop from coming back. However, I may want to reserve this move until black has played e6, stopping the bishop from coming back. Not that it necessarily would, but the fewer options I give my opponent, the more opportunity I have. You don't want to give your opponent opportunity. There is play against this bishop, often a central feature of my opening system. A common defense is to move my knight to h4 and attack the bishop thusly. The bishop cannot, in this case, retreat safely to g6 to avoid the threat of an exchange. Black will play h takes g. At that point, pawn takes knight, opening up this dark square diagonal, and you can see already where the ready-made attack might come from. That suggests that this idea of moving my knight to h4 would not be in my best interest at this time. If I move my knight to d2, I'll put my rook on e1, perhaps move my knight to f8. It's a little slow, and then from f8 jump to the e3 square, and now I'm worrying the bishop and the pawn, which has now can only be defended one way by another pawn, and that is e6. There's no c pawn to defend this d5 pawn, meaning it is more ripe for a counterattack than usual. We will do that. We're just going to play solidly. I'm not in a rush to connect my rooks, since the f rook, the kingside rook, does have a half open diagonal, and I'm going to have to leave the a1 rook snoring as he is on the a1 squared before I wake him up. Rooks have to be woken up. Okay. Now, black played really his first, I would describe, unorthodox move in this position, picking up his own rook and waking it up on the a8 square and bringing it to the d file. I can understand some of the idea here. I remember I talked about the d pawn is a little bit weaker than it normally would be because of the absence of a c pawn to support it. However, that is a very nuanced detail that I don't think really plays a great deal of relevance in this precise position. He did seem to read my mind, or that I am planning, though, to try to put a little pressure on the d pawn by eventually maneuvering my knight to e3, and he has buttressed it. The most important fact, however, here is he has now lost the right, according to the rules of chess, to castle queenside. His own king is still in the center. I can really start to see if I can put pressure. How do I break the center? I could start breaking the center by playing c4 and start to play vigorously from this point. Even maybe start with the threat, an accelerator move, a threat here. Maybe he drops the bishop back or plays b6. Then I push c4, supported by my knight. If he captures, my knight on c4 worries his queen, so that comes also with a bit of tempo. Then my knight in play against with an isolated queen pawn at that point can come to an outpost on e5, working with the bishop on e1 down this e file. So I may want to explode the position here. Currently I'm sitting like a powder keg that is unlit and rather soppy. My position is passive. All my pieces are on my side of the board. I'm threatening nothing, not a single threat against any of these black pieces. But I do have some positional trumps. Another centering on the fact that his king is still in the center. I do have the Patzer pin against the knight. The knight, not really a worry for me, though, at this time. It can't move even if it wanted to, because it has no good squares to go to. It can't go here, it can't go here, right? Those are the two squares it would like to go. Suppose it goes to c5. Well, I guess it could slot itself into the hole on c4. However, my knight or my bishop could exchange it off there. And if he recaptured with the pawn, he would lose central control on the e4, and he would be initiating a lot of activity in the center with his king still there. I expect him to try to develop the bishop either by playing g6 or e6. Those are the only ways, really, and coming out to these classic developmental squares for the black's dark squared bishop. Now, how do I play? I feel like going wild. Next step would be to clear my king out. I want to develop my own dark squared bishop, but currently that dark squared bishop is inhibited. The rook has been asking patiently to come to the e file, and that may be my best move. The defense of this bishop could become important if black goes for the Patzer pin, and black would be suicidal for black to try to play the pawn break here, e7, e6. Really, chess initiative in chess, and most of the positional play centers around who's got the pawn breaks and which is more important. Black has a pawn break e7 to e5, but would be busting the whole center open with his king still there. Very unadvisable. I have the pawn break c3 to c4 double-edged because I would be saddling myself with an isolated queen pawn and therefore would have to play vigorously from that point. Otherwise, by the time the pieces are exchanged off and the endgame arrives, the pawn would go from a strength to a weakness because it can't be defended by another pawn. I'm going to go rook e1. We're going to hold our cards tight to our chest. I'm not sure how strong this 1900 bot is going to be. The 1800 bots were playing at a 1900 level, and I think in one case at a 2000 level. They were punching way above their weight. Way above their weight. Now, as the white, I may just aim for a draw here. If I do nothing, black has not a lot of opportunity against my solid system. Solidity is the key feature of my system. I have a strong point in the center. I've developed my kingside minor pieces. My king is safe in the corner, and I've brought a rook to the center where there will be a open file or half open pile opening up almost inevitably in most games. Knight e4 has arrived, and now we have really our first set of tension since the Benoni between our opposing forces of white and black. I don't do well against knights that are posted up on my side of the board. That's number one. So as soon as this knight dropped into e4, my blood pressure skyrocketed. And then I cough afterwards. I do get allergies these days living in the state of Missouri, the show me state. Which is odd because I've never had allergies before, having grown up in Northern California and lived in Connecticut for so many years. I do consider myself a Connecticut Yankee, but of course, my genetic heritage comes from Scotland. I want to take this knight. An advantage of my opening system, let's run through it one more time. d4, knight f3, e3, bishop e2, and castles. The advantage of my system is it keeps all the pawns and pieces on the board. All of them. Every single one. 8 pawns and all 4 minor pieces, both rooks and the queen. Unless black starts something. If black plays symmetrically and approximates my own development without really starting a fisticuffs, then black will get equality, or so close to equality that it might as well be equality. I will get the thinnest hair's breadth sliver of advantage. I can't expect to get a big advantage once I've put my bishop on e2. It's a passive square. However, when you're playing lower rated opponents, keeping more material on the board means you have more to work with. You have more tools in your toolbox. You have more opportunity to outplay your opponent. Your opponent has more pieces with which to put on bad squares and misplay. I'm thinking knight takes knight, probably bishop takes knight, posting a piece on the central square. Remember, pawns on the central square are good. They should be supported by another pawn, but pieces on central squares are even better if they can be supported by a pawn and maintained in the center. Why? Because pieces in the center can run to the king side or queen side quite easily and control a great deal of very important squares. In the past, I've tried to leave these things and I deny their strength. Notice the attack on the f2 pawn, which is now guarded only by my king. if black can follow that up somehow, it could become a tender spot in my setup. It isn't now. A pawn is not weak unless it can be attacked. This pawn can be attacked, so we could arguably say it's weak, but until and unless I play queen to b3, black does not need to necessarily treat it as a weakness. So I'm thinking here, knight takes knight. That relieves, I am, believe it or not, a little bit cramped because of my decision to play c3 and not develop my knight normally, allowing my bishop access to its natural development diagonal. So I'm relieving a little bit of cramp, if you will. Perhaps that's not the best word for it. It's hard to talk about cramp if you've got a strong point on d4. Cramp is usually you've played Indian style and you're in a box no greater than 3 squares high and 8 squares across. That's cramp. 4 pieces in this box is cramp, and I do have all 4 pieces in that box, and no pawns, all the pawns in here too, taking up vital squares. Cramp hurts because your pieces may not get to good squares. My plan was knight to f1, and I'm going to look at that for a moment. That would vacate, so there's no longer any tension between the knights, and it would threaten to put my knight on e3, which would do so with tempo. Most likely the light square bishop will retreat to g6, but I will be blocking my own half-open file. I will be putting pressure on the d5 with my knight on e3. However, black has made a rather unorthodox move to provide further defense to that pawn, and let's face it, e6 is likely to come, and the d pawn will be supported by the e6 pawn. Black has traded a side pawn for the center, arguably an advantage, because now he has a central pawn majority. He has 2 pawns in the center against my 1, and by the center I'm talking about d and e, and these 4 squares specifically, d4, d5, e4, e5. If I take here and he captures with the pawn, well, now he's got double pawns. He is threatening my knight. My knight can't come back to a natural retreating square on e1, but can retreat to d2, which is the usual retreat square, and it is putting pressure on e4, which can be supplemented by perhaps dropping the bishop back to f1 or playing the Patzer pin, and now the rook has joined pressure against this e pawn. So it's unlikely it's going to recapture with e, so we're going to take this. I think it resolves a lot of issues, and if you're not a good calculator like I am, then the less tension the better, because tension is what requires calculation. All right, he took with the pawn. I feel this is positionally not the best move. Miquel is saying Morphy would be proud of me for this position. Not sure why. I can't remember Morphy leaving his king in the center like this. Morphy was all about rapid development, whirlwind attacks, and taking advantage of what was frankly very poor play by his opponents. Many of Morphy's games are against amateurs. Morphy really pioneered the importance of rapid development in chess and demonstrated it. He was an e-player, though, e-pawn player, obviously, because e-pawn unlocks a queen and a bishop and is faster than the d-pawn, which only unlocks the bishop and stunts the queen. Doesn't open a diagonal for Her Majesty. He may want to play e4, e3, but I seem to have that under control, at least by a pawn. The question now is, where do I move the knight? There is the bishop move, knight to h4. I took that off the table earlier because I thought it likely black would retreat the knight, and then when I captured it, he would open the h file for his attack. Here, he's lost one of the important attackers, the knight on the king's side, the king's knight. For you people who speak dinosaur, this is the king's side, obviously. He's lost one of the attackers. I've done nothing really wrong to compromise my position. I would probably end up blunting the h file by playing h3, an important and useful move in its own right because it creates a trapdoor, though that trapdoor does not exist with the queen on d6, but if the queen moves away, the trapdoor will become an escape valve for the king. I could play pawn sacrifice here. That would be really suicidal, though. Knight takes, pawn takes, queen takes, discovered attack. Yeah, that's not happening. That's not. Dream on, black, if you think I'm playing that. I could move the knight to g5, attacking his tender spot on f2, the traditional a la Morphy attack spot. Morphy would play a lot of King's Gambit, where the idea was the bishop and the knight to team up on attacking the f-pawn. Morphy would castle quickly, and because he played the King's Gambit and exchanged off the f-pawn, the rook could participate in that attack too, and even the queen by bringing her to f3. All of it focused on the tender spot, the traditional weak spot of black's position. The f7 pawn defended as it is right from the opening array, only by the king. If I want to play drawishly, I can put my knight on d4. The hops from that square include knight to c4 to worry this queen. So we could see something bizarre like knight to d2. He attacks the knight and the pawn. I don't want to take for some reason. I come here, the queen has to move. Unlikely. That this is an unlikely resource for the knight at this time. I don't really see a follow-up from there. The e5 square, not something that can be easily occupied positionally with its rook staring down my queen on the d file. I want to maintain my strong point. Really a key reason for moving c3. We put a pawn in the center and we protect it with another pawn. When I lost my e pawn, I decided to protect with the c pawn, keeping with the Russian schoolboy textbook principle of a pawn in the center supported by another pawn. And this is a chain, so if somehow he gets at my c3 pawn, I will replace it with the b pawn and maintain this chain. I will then have what are called hanging pawns. We're getting very esoteric now, very far into the future, and not discussing the concrete threat. You can see why I'm not particularly good at calculation, because I don't look deeply at threats and at the actual tactical scenario. I'm always trying to break the position down in terms of squares rather than tactics. Tactics more important, honestly, and I need to get better at them. Tactics, you can win chess games with tactics alone. Computers have demonstrated that. If a chess player understands tactics and has even a remotely reasonable position, they are dangerous. They are far more dangerous than a position with a very strong a player with a very strong positional sense, but no ability to calculate, like me. So I'm relying a lot on my moves intuitively being good, rather than being good for concrete reasons. It's a precarious existence, let me tell you, chess fans. It's a precarious way to play chess. Alright, so we've talked about the squares. Suppose I move the knight to g5. Well, all the rest of my pieces are still very far away. not ready for a kingside attack. Black could play h6, threatening the knight. Looks like it's going to have to move away. I don't have a capture here, so the knight would have to come back to h4, and then bishop exchanges itself, and now my kingside pawn shield is shattered, and I've got to play a more difficult situation. It's not the end of the world if my kingside pawn position is shattered, because either the g-pawn has to recapture on the h or f files, because I can often get my king to h1, bring the rook to the half-open g file, and as long as I have my light-squared bishop, the arrangement with a light-squared bishop on g2 and a king on h1, with or without the h-pawn, is surprisingly resilient. I've kind of learned that in various endgames. More resilient than you would think. Okay, let's suppose I play back now. I'm kind of pseudo-threatening something like bishop b5, bishop takes the knight, more pressure here, maybe queen also, stack on the e file. I want to take the knight because I don't want to lose time, and I want to expedite getting more pieces onto the e file. If I do move bishop to c5, black does, yes, have a move. He may just, quote-unquote, waste that move by thinking that he's going to gain space, which he would. On the other hand, I could bring the bishop to c2, not exchange it for the knight, and now I've got even more pressure on that e-pawn. So this, ladies and gentlemen, this thorn in my side, this intruder on my side of the railroad tracks, is the target. So let's start with that. I don't believe this is a problem. e6, bishop, no doubt, almost certainly coming to the diagonal, running from the d8 square to my king size h4. A bishop on e7, the old way of playing chess. The bishop here does not influence the central squares as it would if being shadowed, but does and can support action on either flank. Black may play for space here and eventually for this b4 square. I've talked about it. These computers are absolutely fixated on my queenside dark squares, and the battery of queen and bishop supports all that. The bishop couldn't develop more aggressively to c5, b4, or a3 due to the presence of the queen, who really probably here wants to drop back now to c7 to allow more play. The possibility of attack of a whirlwind attack against h2 is diminished without the knight. We've mentioned that. So I've got one attack against one defender. I move this bishop, now I've got two attacks against one defender. So we can move the bishop to f1, but let's look at the aggressive Patzer pin against the knight. Now I've got a pretty serious threat of knight takes pawn, which attacks the queen, probably requires him to either waste another move hustling this queen, it bullies the queen. If he exchanges the light squared, his light squared bishop, then my rook comes to h4, and you think rooks in the center often look awkward and misplaced, but I've had success recently with rooks coming to the center of the board. Not just against these bots, but in my daily 3 activities on chess.com. I won a very nice game, in fact, attacking game where the rook came to the center of the board, then over to the h file, attacking black's king that was castled on the king's side. There was a lot of pawn shield moves, and eventually, due to the rather unorthodox but potentially deadly threat of a rook barreling down against his h7 pawn or on his h file, caused him to blunder. And he was blundered a checkmate that was very geometric and made me feel good. It was a feel-good checkmate. Aren't they all? Well, some are more artistic than others, and like most chess players, I care about the art. But not to the point where I'm going to just throw away pieces because I think that is the most elegant way to win the chess game. I am also brutishly practical. And sometimes in these daily 3 games, when I have a material advantage, I just grind the opponent down. I don't even worry about creating a nice piece of art. I just brutally wear them down. It's World War I trench warfare with all the mud, and my opponent dies face down in the mud. I'll take that one too. There's kind of an art to it also. Another way I play, it's rather sadistic, is, but not intentionally so. When I have a winning position against an exposed king, most players will go for the checkmate. They go for the throw and the kill. Sometimes I'll just dismember my opponent. If he won't resign, I just take piece, pawn, focus on another target, piece, pawn, and just dismember them. I may have a checkmate. I may have overlooked mate in 5. I may overlook mate in 4. But I'm just going to dismember them, and with every pawn and piece that comes off, defeat inches closer. A dark squared bishop, still unemployed and undeveloped. This threat seems very nice. There's no particular threat. There's no particular threat on its d1 to h5 diagonal, but this seems to be the move. And we're going to start opening. The more of the issue is this black knight really is doing nothing. It could eventually support the advance of a b pawn in what is called a minority attack. I'm outnumber black on the queen side 4-2, and that is my passport to victory because I have 2 pawns with an unimpeded path to the coronation square. Black has 2 also, but they're doubled, and it's on the e file, easier to stop. That's very long-term consideration, positional consideration. If I play bishop to e5, I'm threatening this e-pawn. I really don't see any other way for black to defend it. He could play moves like queen f4, and now he's defending that d-pawn twice. The queen looks very offsides here. I could harass her by moving my knight away. Discovery against the queen. Maybe she comes over here. Still defending the e4, and yeah, she can't come to g, which is important because black could try an old trick. If the queen comes to the g file, black could try the old trick of positioning the knight on h3, and I can't capture due to the check. I don't believe this is a defensive resource for black. A key moment in the game, really, because black has to prove why he thinks Morphy would be happy with this move. Miguel, I don't see it. If I put the bishop on b5 and he says, well, you're threatening my pawn, I agree, but I'm going to create a counter threat against your light square bishop. I can either just take the knight off, not losing any time. The queen will capture though, and now he's got, okay, so that may be the rub here. If he plays h6 and I play bishop takes knight, then the queen relocates, something she probably should be doing anyway, like I said. And from queen takes bishop on the c6 square, she is defending the pawn on e4, meaning now it has 2 attackers and 2 defenders on it. But then I could bring even more pressure against it with my queen now coming to e2, getting my queen off the back rank, one more step closer to connecting my rooks, and applying more pressure on e4. Then how does black defend? The bishop here on f5 prevents a pawn from supporting another pawn in the center, the most basic of all, really, chess opening principles. I can preserve my light squared bishop simply by putting it on f1. That keeps a piece around my king, which may be important since I no longer have an f3 knight, the best defender of the king. I could even play a super highly delayed Catalan by playing g3 and putting my bishop on the long light squared diagonal, which would support operations in the center and eventually trying to create a pass pawn with my queenside pawn majority. There's a lot to be said for bishop f1. Plus, I'm not exchanging my bishop for the knight, losing the minor exchange, and for a knight that really right now isn't doing anything. And then ask the question, black, how are you going to protect this pawn? So let's say bishop to f1. Black protects the pawn by playing queen to d5. Queen very much in the center now. I continue, again, piling pressure by queen e2. I'm putting my 2 heavy pieces opposite the king. That can't be bad with breaks coming. I don't want to necessarily trade off my light square bishop either because his king is on a light square in the center. And at some point with his knight moving away for whatever reasons, he could have issues with that. And his own knight, white light square bishop, is weaker right now for the fact it doesn't have scope. It's not attacking anything on my side of the board. Bishops like to have attacking squares and things. They like to have things in their sights. All right, so I'm going bishop f1. That's how we're going to play this. Okay, and Miguel has said, I've seen Petrosian games like this before. Maybe I'll have to sack the exchange. Petrosian famous for sacrificing the exchange. I'm going to take the Petrosian comment as a compliment because my chess opening is very much in the spirit of Petrosian, a drawing master who took care of his own safety as priority number 1, even to the point of neglecting his own potentials. Okay, now we ask yet again, how he's going to defend this e-pawn if my queen comes to e2. Now I've got 3 attackers, knight, rook, and queen, against only 2 defenders, one of which is the queen. And black has no way to bring either a pawn or a piece quickly to that defense. And black doesn't appear to have any counterattack. What if knight takes pawn come? That's weird, but we should look at captures and checks. Knight takes pawn, pawn takes knight, queen takes pawn. That's two pawns for a piece. He has opened up the d file before my rooks are connected. That is somewhat worrisome, but I don't believe he's going to have enough compensation. Another move here, since he has in fact put his queen on the d5 square, is a rope-a-dope. The rope-a-dope being having moved the bishop back to f1, its original, undeveloping the bishop to f1, its original starting square in the initial chess array. But now what if I put it here on c4, one of the white's most aggressive diagonals for the light squared bishop, even though it is currently blunted because it aims at that tender f pawn. There would be sacrifices too down the e file against e6 with his king in the center. And if he does castle, well, his king is still on the end of that rainbow. Suppose I come bishop c4. I have two attackers. The queen has to move away. She can't go here or here. She could come to a5. I don't see what the business is on the a5 square. She's likely to retreat. If she comes back to d6, then, well, knight takes pawn comes with a threat against her, and I'm doing better. I'll have a rook here and a bishop here. The queen comes back and tries to, oh, can't, because the bishop will take. How does he put pressure on this bishop? It's unguarded once the knight moves away, but his rook somewhat misplaced, and we mentioned that before. At least it was alluded to between the lines of what I was saying when black put the rook on d8. We were focusing mainly on the fact that black can no longer castle queenside, but also the opening seemed to be more focused on attacking along the c-file, the half-open c-file, after the Benoni pawn was exchanged. It seemed more logical. If you're going to exchange the Benoni pawn, then why not put a rook on that half-open file and start operations? Particularly if I perform this kind of construction, you can have the minority attack. And no, that's not the charge of the light group brigade. The theory behind a minority attack is these pawns can really bust up my pawn chain and create all kinds of weaknesses and problems for me. Plus, the minority attack, when supported by pieces, creates constant tension and strategic tension, positional tension on the chessboard, which occupies white's mental and nervous energy. What is the advantage of queen? Queen is it preserves my bishop on f1. Bishop really not doing much. I'm going to move the bishop here to c4, but honestly it's more out of curiosity to see how black continues to defend this pawn, if at all. Although there is now the knight means something. The knight, no, because the queen is threatened. Black can work on this bishop unguarded as it would be on c4 by moving knight h5 after the queen goes away and all the dust is settled on the e4 square. But I'll just put the bishop back. There's a check here, which is potentially devastating. Remember the king, I want to keep the light square bishop because the open avenue to the king is right here, right now, on a4 to e8. Reminds me of I was looking at one of the daily games of a compatriot of mine on the chess team that we play for in the city of Dundee for Scotland, where my mother lived, where the light square, this particular diagonal played a key, was open like this and played a key role in black's position collapsing. The safer way to play queen d2, and let's not neglect our safety, particularly since Miquel is complimenting us as Petrosian. Okay, I'm not displacing the queen. Agreed. But I'm going to put here. So he'll take, I'll take, he'll take. The queens come off. I don't think I'm really any better if the queens come off. Why? Because the black king is in the center where he wants to be when the queens come off. Once the queens are off, we have officially entered what is called the end game. And in most end games, and even in most queenless middle games, though that animal does exist, The king wants to be in the center of the board, so I don't want queens off. I don't want to play queen takes e4. Also, I may want to support my activity on these light squares by, after my bishop arrives on c4, by moving my queen to e2, which not incidentally also gets it off the back rank. The exchange in the center is going to help me finally make a decision about my dark squared bishop getting out, and I am providing second rank support with my queen on e2. So this is the move. I want to preserve my queen on. He moved back. I have this pin again. It's still dastardly, but he will thwart it by forcing off the exchange of the light square bishop. I don't want. Then the queen is at a very good defensive square. So the move is knight takes pawn. The queen still unhappy. Not a happy square for the queen on d7, because after knight takes pawn, I could kaplunk the knight, my own knight, on c5, maybe forcing this exchange. That would have to be prepared for. Counter, I don't see what his defense is. He still can't fork these pieces. My rook's in the center of the board. Here comes the annoying move. I just moved the bishop away, as I was intimating during my calculations. They were more like ruminations than calculations, weren't they? I'll move the bishop away. Could come to d3 instead. I could even move the bishop to b3, and if the knight takes, boom, and now my rook has business. So this is the threat. The bishop is undefended. I have to be careful too, because my rook is undefended. My pieces are not well coordinated at the moment. That is often the case once you've captured material. I am the material equivalent of one pawn up, plus I've got positional trumps. If I had to guess the computer's evaluation here, and I'm notoriously bad at guessing the computer's exact numerical evaluation, I would suspect I could be up here by the equivalent of 2 pawns, $2 and change. If I move the bishop back to d3, I can organize my queen to the e3 square. That gets these 3 pieces all coordinated again. The rook a little unsteady, but a queen behind it. Black has real problems on the light squares. There's a potential sacrifice right now on e6 that I should look at, in addition to other squares for this light squared bishop. Let's look at that immediately. We'll look at the fireworks first. He would take with the pawn. I put pressure down the center. He could always shield his king, and even if I win the pawn, it's probably not enough to checkmate him. This could work, it could. And if I was a great calculator and a crafty tactician, maybe I could find something in this. It's almost like a Sicilian style attack. Interestingly, Black did play the Queen's Pawn Sicilian, if you will. Humor me for a moment. The Benoni. c4, and Fischer often played bishop c4 against the Sicilian defense. Sacrifice, also see it a lot in the Caro-Kann. This, a sacrifice on the e6 square. It is not the type of position I play well. Okay, so let's look at my squares. Sacrifice there, possible but doubtful. Maybe possible. Can't go here, can't go here. Possible to go here, asking Black to help me develop my rook on the A file. I could also recapture with the queen, but now Black is providing second rank defense. any sort of aggression Black was planning has now completely faded, just like the tide. He came up and then he went back. The queen came up and then stepped back, just like the tide. High tide, low tide. He's on a low tide right now. He does have squares now for the dark squared bishop, natural looking moves, and castles. I reserve the option to attack on the king's side. Despite having no more knights, which I like to play with, I do have the quote-unquote advantage of the dark squared bishops, and if I retreat my bishop to d3, now my attack is in fact brewing on the king's side should he try to get out of the center. There's ultimately also this break. So I'm going to move the bishop back here. We're going to play again calmly. The most likely reply will be bishop to d6. Now Black has left a piece doing nothing again. Way offsides on the A file. And I'm thinking about attacking. So, and then I'll proceed somehow, probably by queen to e2, like I said, to coordinate my pieces and defend this rook. I can always retreat this way. And the rook, I'm a little worried about the rook being subject to attack. If I play here, the very weakening, there's a potential check. This is on. Both pieces are coordinated. Okay, so here's the move. Again, I'm playing contained within myself on my side of the board, looking for my positional trumps. Black has moved his knight back to the c6 square. The little demonstration is over. To what benefit is unclear. He's down a pawn. That was not a defense. There's no real opportunity for this knight yet in the center because I control those squares, both of them. I control both those squares, the d4 and the e5 square. Now I want to complete my development calmly. I don't want to play bishop. I don't want to play the Patzer pin to bishop to b5 because Black will gain space on the queen side and may actually start to organize the minority attack, which I said. So Black is down upon the first. Being down upon almost always comes with compensations. It's rare that you're up upon and have all the compensation. And that compensation is half open files, which he has now on C and D. And he has the heavy pieces on those files to control them. Also, there's the possibility of develop my queen to c2, often the better square for the queen. For reasons I don't precisely and always understand, that would allow my rooks to connect if need be by withdrawing my rook, although I'm planning to go over here, ladies and gentlemen. The queen on c2 forms a battery against a traditional weak spot in Black's formation. The h7 pawn, if I do somehow capture the h7 pawn, Black will gain a further compensation with another open file. It's not necessarily full compensation. I still have my light squared bishop. Well, no, my light squared bishop, who knows where my light squared bishop at that point. But I can blunt the dark squares. I can now more effectively weaken my light squares on the king side by playing a defensive move such as g3 to thwart Black's dark squared activity. Because Black doesn't have a light square bishop to take advantage of light square weaknesses on my king side. That, again, is far off in the future. My position is not aggressive per se, but aggression is building, and I have no real weaknesses yet, till this minority attack comes, which I do not intend to hasten by giving him a target. And I'm still not trading off this knight. Well, let's see where this knight can go. Knight could come any of these two squares. question now, do I develop my dark squared bishop, and if so, where? If I put it on f4, he could offer, I would say, go for the exchange since I'm up material. Then he castles. Now I attack with 3 pieces against basically none on the king side. Putting the bishop on f4 does block lateral movement by my rook. I think queen e2 is the move. I want to continue to pressure the light squares and specifically his minor strong point on e6, which may not be so strong. If I blast through it, also I can induce pressure against it. Even playing c3, c4, and so I reserve really want to reserve 2 essential plans for breaking down black here. Either continue operations in the center with the possibility even going as far as pawn breaks down the C and D, or being able to switch to a queenside attack, kingside attack. Bishop e7, the natural defensive square. Oh, it's a good one. Now, I mean, he's bringing a piece into defense. It's unclear whether a checkmate is really in the cards, but I could induce further weaknesses. Now maybe my bishop wants to come out to f4, connecting my rooks, completing not connecting my rook, but completing my development finally on move 18. In my opening system, let's run through the moves one more time. d4, knight to f3, e3, bishop e2, and castles. This dark squared bishop, because of the presence, long-term presence of a pawn on e3, is often my problem piece. Very similar to the problem bishop in the French defense. I could have considered last move developing the bishop to g5. Let's not dwell in the past, preventing contesting. We're going to go here. Yeah, I agree, yeah. But I want him to proceed. I want this. I want him to attack me. That's one of the secret hidden traps of my opening. It's passive, but it's defensive. And if he attacks, the attack leaves weaknesses in its wake. May even result in black desperately trying to sacrifice material to keep the attack going. I neutralize all that. I take advantages of those weaknesses that opened up behind black's attack, and we end the game. Counterpunch. It is my opening system, the Yusupov-Rubinstein bishop, as it is on e2, is a counter-punching opening. And so many players of black play aggressive openings like the Grunfeld and the King's Indian against the d-pawn. They don't play symmetrically, which I believe is the antidote and the answer to my my opening system. Instead, they play aggressively, and Benoni, also another aggressive method of play, and unorthodox. They play these Indian defenses or Benonis, and those are all playing directly into my hands. So here is the move. He's weakened this diagonal. I have the advantage of the 2 bishops, but the advantage is not an advantage unless I take advantage of the advantage. I can preserve the bishop, moving it to d2, bringing the rook to the e file, and then potentially sacrificing here, but I believe he has more than enough resources to defend that king. If I bring the bishop to d2, I could try a move like f4, supported by the rook, not from behind on f1, but the rook on e4, so a lateral support. That's a little unorthodox, but the f pawn advancing supported by a rook one way or the other is thematic. I could move the bishop to e3. That looks not good for my bishop, and then try to focus on this. He could try to come down the g file. He's a little, again, with the light squares gone and his queen unable to occupy d5 due to harassment from my bishop, he's unlikely to get attacking pressure against g2. My light squared bishop is the lord of the light squares also, and those are opening up. He really needed to start to contest those light squares, and if you don't have a light squared bishop, the next way to contest the light squares is to have the pawns do that. But if you start putting the pawns on dark squares, well, you're no longer contesting the light squares, are you? That's just geometry. He is removing targets from the light squares. I will give him that. So this light square bishop has fewer targets. However, he seriously weakened his h pawn here. And that was something that I'd considered attacking with queen c2. This is going to come next. So the bishop wants to come back to g3. And he wants to be there because he doesn't like not having anything to do and wants a nice wide open highway. Bishop on g3 controls the b8 square, and you ask Maxwell, why do you think the b8 square is necessary? Because if he does this minority attack, then having a rook on the b file supporting the advance of the b pawn to b5 to break up my pawn chain could be an integral support for those operations. Also, I'm preventing the dark square bishop from coming to a more active square menacing my king side. If I play bishop g3, almost certainly then we're going to see h5 with threat of playing h4. That doesn't win my bishop, or does it? Because even if I put my bishop on the available square e5, then he could throw the whole entire kitchen sink at my dark square, dominating all the dark squares along the b8 h2 diagonal, and thus trapping my bishop, probably causing it to sacrifice itself, hopefully for 2 pawns, and that would restore material equality. Hopefully, if I could get 2 pawns for it. For that reason, Master says, why take the risk here? Why take the risk of moving the bishop to g3? The queen sufficiently close to the king side and providing support on the second rank mitigates checkmates. He's blocking his own dark squared bishop. I do want to counterattack with f4, again counterpunching, supported by the rook on the e4 square, which black can't easily dislodge without a very serious weakening. We're going to put the bishop on d2. Here comes h5. We anticipated this. I personally believe black should have been playing on the queen side. Maybe kept the king in the center, hoping that he had enough here, because I wasn't able to calculate sacrifices effectively, and not castling until I had so many problems from the minority attack that I would not be able to get my kingside attack going. The pawn has come into the purview of the queen now. However, it is protected by the rook. These pawns will march down. I can try and lock them. I have done nothing wrong necessarily on the king side with my defense. And I certainly have not created any hooks, not even my usual h3 move, which would be a hook. So if the pawn was on h3, black could continue a potential attack with g4. The other problem black has is the knight still far away from supporting all this activity. Bishop very much supports it, but then the king is blocking his rooks from being connected, and he can't bring his rooks behind these advancing pawns on g and h because his king's in the way. This is coming, ladies and gentlemen. I'm weakening my dark diagonal to my king, but unlike him, black, Miquel, who weakened the light square diagonal to his king, I had the bishop to take care of that. Still can. I could even do something really bizarre. I could play bishop b5. Black may reply with the perfunctory a7, a6. A human player would almost certainly just throw that in. The Silicon Beast might not calculate it, because I could play bishop takes pawn, question mark, exclam, pawn takes bishop, queen takes pawn, and argue that even though material equality has been restored, I have four, count them, four pawns on the queen side, and black has goose egg, 0, a bagel hole. And black has not connected his rooks, meaning despite all the newly opened files from this bizarre bishop 2-pawn sacrifice, black can't get in the way of those, and they could start the steamroller from hell. And with these 4 pawns lined up on my 4th rank, and then actually entering with literally no pawns in front of them and 4 potential coronation squares, and a kingside attack that it probably will end up going nowhere. Black could have problems with that. So I bet this is feasible. I bet the computer doesn't like it. The computer in particular is good at defending. I think from a practical human standpoint, defending would be challenging for black, and white would still be winning. But I'm not going to play that way. I am going to play f4. I'm going to continue in a very disciplined manner, not playing to the peanut gallery for this weird bishop 2-pawn sacrifice, and then a severe material imbalance of pawns. Instead, I am going to play on the king side where my pawns point. It's going to be a calm move supported by the rook and the bishop. Everything is coordinated. I'm not giving up my material advantage, and I am putting pressure on the e6 square where I've already begun to assemble my forces. And the black king is at the end of that, the tail end of that. Checkmate ends the game. So here we go. I am leaving these 2 pawns kind of to their own devices. So we could see advance here like I thought we would. Opening dark squares up again for the bishop. Because these 2 pawns are together, they support the advances of each other. My plan in the back of the head was, whatever break black tries here, I will lock it. Whatever break, if he tries to break g4, g3, I'll play h2, h3. If he tries to break after moving his pawn to h4, down to h3, I will block it by playing g3. Yes, my king will be more open. I can defend the diagonals into my king side with my 2 bishops or my queen. And I have a strong point, and a very strong point now, even stronger than it was before, because it can't be assailed by a pawn, thusly, which was also suicidal anyway, because it just opens things for black. But as long as I maintain this strong point, there's no attack coming down the a7, g8 file against my king. So let's continue with the plan. I play here now that there's nothing he can do on the light squares about it. If he tries to bypass here, and this drops, so that's an issue. Let's not forget when he moved his rook to d8, and rather unorthodox square, early in the opening, it was on move 8. He did create this pressure on along down the d file, and I do have a bishop on the d file sitting there. And if I were to lose this strong point for any reason, the tables turn and I'm dropping a bishop. Even if I move this light square bishop away, look at that, ladies and gentlemen, chess fans, then the other bishop, who are both roosted comfortably behind the d4 pawn. So that's actually something I hadn't really considered until now, and don't have a particular answer to. One possibility is simply bring my rook over, or maybe this is the time to start liquidating my bishops with either the funky bishop for 2 pawns sacrifice after a6, or bishop takes knight. Why would I want to play bishop takes knight now when I didn't want to play it before? Well, before I didn't want to exchange off the knight because the knight had nowhere to go. The knight does have somewhere to go now, and did with this pressure. Maybe that was something I wasn't aware of. But another reason why I might want to take off the knight now is because this is my attack right here. This is the copse of the trees from my charge across the field. This is what I'm targeting, the big rock on e6. And this knight is in the vicinity of the king. It is on a diagonal, but the knight is a defender of the e file, specifically e7, where the dark squared bishop has decided to set up camp. So one is I get one piece off this d file. Then I can bring the rook to the d file. Now I can lose my central pawn strong point. He will undoubtedly force me to lock this side. I don't necessarily have to lock it. It could be one of these pawn breaks. I can simply take the pawn. And I have a lot of stuff down here. So, wow, it's really really complicated. Maybe I need to slow down again and think about how the position has changed. My dark square bishop unhappy again, yet again, the problem child of the Max Murray opening, because he's staring once again at the backsides of pawns, thinking, what if I just move the bishop to e1, maybe then put the rook on d. Now I'm definitely locked everything down and brought maximal central pressure, and the bishop controls g3, discouraging a break on that square, which could be important. Plus the bishop can come to f2, vacated by the f pawn, providing support to the strong point and opposing any potential attacks black would have due to pawn weakening and opening up my king. So I do think this is the best move. The computer's not going to like it, but I have so many positional trumps right now in addition to my one pawn material advantage, and I don't see black coordinating particularly well, and the f pawn is actually doing a very good service here because I want to chomp down on that d5, so my central point on d4. So this is the move. It's a little odd. It takes a square away from the queen, I guess. I got to be careful about this rook being trapped, but I don't see how that's happening. The knight 3 jumps away. No light squared bishop. King is going to have to do something. He's going to have to do something with his king. This dark squared bishop could theoretically come to h4 also, and supporting this kind of shenanigan. So let's go ahead. Dark squares, ladies and gentlemen. Here is a 6. Did white do the calculation? Did the CPU, did the binary ones and zeros calculate that bishop b5 was a problem? And that, remember, that was my initial thought, was exchange for this knight, which is going to be defensive in the center, that where I plan to play. So yeah, okay, that's not bad. That's not bad. Also, the minority attack is coming. Black trying to play on all sides of the board. Remember, chess.com claims this is a balanced bot, so it would seem kind of fitting that Black would try to play on all sides of the board. However, that reminds me of the old axiom, try to please everybody and please nobody. Obviously, he wouldn't be able to put all his energy into both sides of the board. I'm going to put the rook now on d1. Possibly the bishop here. Possibly bishop f2 coming. He has weakened the dark squares. He has weakened those. A little bit on the queen side. That wasn't my play. I could consider grabbing space on the queen side. There is a possibility. I hadn't really considered it. I did consider sacrificing the bishop for 2 pawns and pushing all 4 of these monsters. The bishop on e2 supporting that particular triangle formation. I'm then likewise doing the same thing as Black, playing on both sides of the board. Perhaps not effectively in either, both sides of the board and the center. Bishop e2, probably an inaccuracy, honestly. Still want to bring my rook to d. Maybe drop the bishop back now to c2. Now I've completely vacated the d except for my rook. And the rook is opposite the queen, nullifying and making my d pawn more mobile and ready to go. Because I put my bishop on e1, the rook can't come to e1 itself, so I'm not going to be able to put maximal heavy piece pressure down the e file. Rooks belong here in the center. This rook has been doing nothing. All his pieces arguably are doing something, even this rook here. So he's, despite me being up the material equivalent of a pawn, I'm playing four pawns down because I haven't brought my rook in. Here comes the minority attack. Double pawn sacrifice. Now a distinct reality. So we'll look at it. We'll look at it. It's a crazy way to play. Crazy. Bishop takes pawn. Pawn takes bishop. Queen takes pawn. I've won 2 pawns for my bishop. Material equality on the board has been restored. Black decides I'm going to attack your queen. The classic attack down the b file. I can bring the queen all the way back to e2 and defend that pawn. Then I start him rolling. Get them doggies rolling raw hard. Black will have 2 minor pieces. I will have only 1 at that point. My dark squared bishop, which does oppose his. If those exchange off, then it's essentially 3 pawns against a knight. But better than being 3 pawns, it's 4 pawns majority on the queen side to 0. May have to maintain this strong point, so then really it's these 3 pawns that are going to have to get the business done. Once I do start moving them, they will become objects of attack. And black does have, and I noted this, black does have piece activity, meaning I don't think I have the same advantage that I did. You know, I really should have maybe snapped off that knight when I had the chance, honestly. Because I'm asking myself, what is my light squared bishop doing if it's not going to, other than tempting me to throw myself onto the rocks like to the call of a siren. Okay, we're reshuffling. He's castled. That I think is a mistake. The computer may not think so, and obviously Miquel at rated 1900 doesn't think so, otherwise he wouldn't have played it. But now he can't play in all three parts of the board, which was causing me fits. He has evacuated the center. I agree he's done it so in a timely manner, just when I'm about to break it open, but not... But then look, he moved his pawn shield. This might be coming. I could still whack the e6 pawn, the linchpin of his defense. Queen can come here, and that's checkmate. Queen cannot be harassed on d3. Once I come here and threaten mate, boom. The bishop on e1 is applying pressure to the b4 square. b4, such the object of the idolatry of these computers. They just obsess about this b4 square. I could play a3, trying to slow down his minority attack. But I don't think I will. I'm going to go with the original sort of plan that if he does exchange the b pawn for my c3 pawn, I'll capture with b. And you remember I talked about this as early as the opening stages. I've seen this before, chess fans, and I'll see this again. I mean, this is not my first rodeo with my opening system. I played hundreds of games with it. I know what's coming. This pawn undefended. h3 is a possibility. Let's go on the white squares again. And if he captures, queen takes with very dire threats on that h. Queen can't get over there easily. I don't, under any circumstances, want to allow him to play f5. That not only consolidates his pawn structure on the king side, which would shield at a distance his king, but if he can do that while protecting his soft spot on e6, which he has to defend with the pawn at this stage. If he can somehow get this f5 in, then and protect his e6 pawn, I'm not clear. I'm still winning. Still have a very strong position, but that's harder for me to deal with. The question now is, I've moved my pieces to what I think are more optimal squares. Most poignantly, waking up the rook on a1 and putting it on d1, where it coordinates with the light squared bishop. Here doesn't work because of the knight. But this could be a problem for him. Could be. If I put my queen here, now I've taken pressure off of e6. And he takes immediate advantage of that by playing so I put my queen on d3 looking for this mate, and he immediately shuts that diagonal down, and I can't play here. So I still think I need to shuffle pieces. Or we go after this pigeon. Remember, now consistency of plan in chess is surprisingly important. We think more, especially as moderns, we think more in terms of adaptability. Consistency being more of a medieval mode of thought, keeping things the same and perseverating. However, adaptability can lead to a paralysis of analysis or cause a lack of focus. The plan is, and always was, attack on the king side, and black has now provided the opportunity to do so by putting his king over there and self-removing his own pawn shield. I think I want to play this. I want to open lines, lift the rook, come over. This is it. We're going after the rabbit just like greyhounds. If I go here, he can't push because I have stopped it. Okay, I want to get that in before he manages to get in f5, and for that reason I can't move my queen yet because I must keep pressure on e6. We're coming now. We're going. Okay, it's coming. Attacking a rather inconsequential pawn and the rook and defending. That's probably the real point. Once again, the queen is revisiting the d5 square, and once again I may unceremoniously evict her with my bishop. This time not bishop c4, but bishop b3, bringing my bishop to a dangerous diagonal ending in his king and providing more pressure against e6. So f5, rook takes pawn, is possible even after I move my queen away because the bishop will be doing the role of my queen. So this doesn't work for him. This doesn't work for him. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. I'm gonna defend the attacked pawn. Not that that pawn is really a strong consideration at this moment. And I'm gonna evict his queen. It's that simple. Maybe he'll put the queen on f5 at that point. But now look, 1, 2, 3. Oops! Don't make a mouse slip, Max. Don't make a mouse slip. Right here. Also, the bishop on b3 supports moving finally my strong point. He could come with a check. I'll step out of the way. That's a little dangerous for me. I might have to step towards the f because this is coming. So most likely this is what's going to happen. He does have this f5 square. He does have it. We agree. Everyone is in full agreement. What I'm feeling intuitive is I may have to sacrifice to get the mate. Not my style of play at all. There is enough fodder in this position that a sacrifice, and I've already talked about it with the silly sacrifice of a bishop for 2 pawns. There's enough fodder in this position where sacrifices may be workable. He's 1900, so unlike the lower rated bots, he's not just going to hand me a win. I can't rely on black making weak moves continuously until he loses. Not at 1900. If he makes 1900 level moves for the entire game, I'm going to have to make 2000 to 2150 or 2200 moves to beat him. Now, the f5 square critical. Because what's going to happen here is bishop b3 attacking the queen. The queen is going to reposition to the f5. Now I could worry the queen with rook. Then we sacrifice the exchange a la Petrosian. Now I have 4 pawns pointing towards this king, and we continue with my 2 bishops down here, right? Or he puts the queen on f5, and I continue with this plan. Pawn takes pawn. Now he takes queen takes pawn. If we exchange the queens off, there's also a potential. There's potential here. With the queen on f5, there's a fork that the bishop could take advantage of. Or if there are pawn exchanges here and a queen ends up on g4, there's also a fork with check against the queen. So let's look at that and see if there's some tactic there that allows me to exchange queens here and win. Bishop b3 threatening the queen. I believe this is really his only move. To stop me from just liquidating his kingside pawns. Then I take pawn takes pawn. Let's say he takes queen takes pawn, because that's the tactics we want to look at right now. Then I play rook takes pawn! Exclamation. If black plays pawn takes rook, then bishop takes pawn check, forking the king and queen. The queen takes the bishop, my queen takes his queen. I have a queen, a rook, and a dark squared bishop against, and then after the check, against 2 rooks and a dark squared bishop. So I'm ahead, not counting pawns into that equation. That's interesting. I may just want to put it on the board to look at it. More concretely, if the queen comes to f5, I could bail out by moving my bishop back. Due to this threat along the light squares, he'll probably have to bring the queen back to d5, and I will have to recalibrate. I could play rook right now, a la Petrosian, sacrifice the exchange. Knight takes rook, pawn takes rook. Again, the light square diagonal, very dangerous for him. And then proceed by liquidating the pawn on g5. Let's see what happens here. Yeah, that's what we thought. Okay. What if I just go with my plan, right? What if he takes pawn takes pawn? There's also this. That opens up here. I could be blowing it right now. I'm distracted. May want to play, now may be the time to play a3, giving my bishop an escape square, but I don't really have to play that yet. If he tries to move his knight away, he's a goner on the king's side. Pawn takes pawn, queen takes pawn, rook takes pawn. That's a whole rook. Queen takes queen, rook takes queen, everything's kosher. Pawn takes pawn, queen takes pawn, rook takes pawn, pawn takes rook, bishop takes pawn, queen takes bishop, queen takes pawn, king moves, queen takes knight. Let's see how it goes. Okay, he had to do pawn takes. Lift the rook. Lift the rook, bring it to g3. Perhaps support my pawn here, fixing this as a target. That does block my dark squared bishop. On the other hand, it prevents his dark squared bishop from shenanigans. The advantage of opening up this rank, this second, is I can bring my queen. I can target this pawn with my light squared bishop by coming back to d1 eventually. I could move my dark squared bishop. This may be, oddly enough, the best move. Moving my dark squared bishop to g3, protecting my f pawn, just kind of holding him while I again restructure. Do I have rook takes pawn in this position? Rook takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, bishop takes pawn. It's the same concept. Queen takes bishop, queen takes queen. That's not good for him. Rook takes pawn. What does he do? I'm also threatening rook takes bishop, winning 2 pieces, but opening up things up. Once rook take pawn goes, there is my f pawn. But rook takes pawn comes with an additional threat of rook takes knight. So I'm thinking rook takes pawn. I don't believe he can recapture due to the fork. He may have to defend this knight. Let's say he moves it away here. Then I can attack the queen, and then it's almost game over at that point. So what is his plan? F pawn, like we thought. I'm up the material equivalent of 2 pawns. I can consider something like rook takes bishop. I can also consider rook to e5, kicking his queen and recapturing with my own f pawn. Now I have 2 pawns in the center. The d pawn is passed. Material equality is restored. I might have wanted just to play the bishop g3 first before all this. So my idea was to bring the rook back to this light square where it's covering. The queen is attacking. Not sure why he didn't capture here. I'm not thinking things through. I'm a little distracted, like I said. Now I just go bishop here, and that consolidates. He's attacking my light squared bishop. I'm fine with that. I really want to put the bishop on D and start on this pawn next. It's on the light squares, and that's where I'm strong because of my... It's going to come here, attacking this. Here, well, I can just let it go. He's wasting time with that. And do I have a more constructive move? Put the pawn on F. I don't need to defend this pawn at all anymore. Threatening to play f5, and that's another pawn to my good. But then there's this. Okay, so calm down. Calm down. Where can this bishop go? I could take this pawn, doesn't do anything, just loses the bishop. You know, he's got too much on that. I could, and probably will, put the bishop on c2. He'll plant the knight here on c4, attacking my b pawn. I want to hold on to my b pawn, so I'll drop my knight back. I can eventually kick the knight with b3. From this square, remember, I don't do well against knights that are posted up. He doesn't really have anything. I could defend the bishop with the queen, but I don't want to take my eye off here. And I really don't want to move the bishop to b1. I want the bishop attacking this pawn. But the bishop's going to have to come to c2 one way or the other. There's the knight move. I'm going to have to do it circuitously, but since I hold all the positional trumps, I could also put the bishop on d3, and now I'm threatening bishop takes knight, pawn takes knight, queen takes. King has a good safe square here. I could bring the rook to the long diagonal and work on this again, this concept. So either one is good. The idea of getting my bishop off c2 is I provide lateral defense with my queen, which I talked about, that is so important in my system. d3, the more active square, does block the rook, but I am not intending at any time yet to advance. So here we go. There's the threat. He's going to guard it with the rook. Is it time now for me to take off that knight? I can no longer play b3 because when the knight moves, then I'm stuck with defending this pawn, and I don't want to be in that situation. He is getting slight counterplay now, but I think I want to activate this rook, get it off d1, and he's probably already losing. I just haven't found the mechanism by which that will happen. Okay, so maybe this doesn't work because the rook is undefended and not connected. So maybe that was a waste of time, but it does defend the bishop here. It's a calm move. He's coming. I'm kind of losing my grip a little bit. I think I want this knight off. When he recaptures with the rook, then I'll come down here. I'm going to triple and we're going to play Neanderthal chess. This pawn is now open. Maybe the rook is better here. I perhaps don't have the same advantage that I did before if the rook comes over. I'm up 2 pawns, material coming off. Queen here. I kind of misplayed slightly. His knight was posted on my side of the board, though. I have a slight weakness here. I might want to provide lateral defense with my rook, allowing my queen to reposition, which she might want to come to F, like I said, then G, then this way. That's a little slow, but I don't see why I can't simply continue. His minority attack more challenging now because his pawns are separated. I have, this might be the move. D5 now finally, protected by the rook, so I'm not putting it in weird artificial squares. But now I'm attacking another light square pawn. He could try, this is light square. Alright, so I think let's get my pass pawn rolling. Oh, that's check. That's check. Yeah, that's check. Rook, king here. Yeah, I might have blundered. King here. Queen checkmate. I gotta block this. I'm gonna lose the exchange. Damn it. I got distracted. That was the problem. King has no other squares. Well, it could come here. Defend that pawn with my king. If I come here, so I don't have to sacrifice the exchange. Check. Here, this pawn's hanging, but it's on a white square and not attacked. Let's not sacrifice this exchange yet. Attacking B, a little tricky now because I can't quite make this maneuver, but I can make this maneuver. Got to be careful because I've offered him an entrance into my position. And he could either cause trouble on the first rank or the second rank. Barely holding it together now in the dramatic closing moments of this game. Rook takes pawn, allows a rook to oppose on the E file, so I can't play rook takes pawn. I can play queen takes pawn, threatening to take his bishop. This rook comes down. Now there's very dangerous for me. I may have to play queen to c2 and take care of my king. Despite all my loosenings, he has not won back material. Rook here, threatening the queen. Not bad. It's on a dark square. The advantage is there's a check, and I could turn the tables, especially here. So this may be the move. We're kind of tearing at each other. I'm gonna somewhat, if I go here, he could play here. Defending this pawn. Oh. I want to get out of this as fast as I can. Bishop here. Let's play bishop here. That might be the move. And bishop there means I can play like this. I can also relocate the bishop if he chooses not to exchange. Push the pawn. Now I'm threatening here and here, sort of, because push the pawn with the threat of moving my rook. Pass pawns must be pushed. He's got to deal with it. Queen potentially a little overloaded. Missing my light squared bishop. Passed pawns must be pushed. What is this? Ah, the rook is hanging. A check. I think this is the move. What is that doing for you? I don't see how he stops this. Now it's game over. Gonna just mangle him. That just puts it on a light square. Oof! That was a mouse slip. Holy Jesus. I meant to put it here. Oh my God. Mouse slip. When I was finally just ready to clean up, I'm a danger, Will Robinson. Here loses. Dicey. It's dicey. Gotta watch out for this sacrifice. He's allowing me too much latitude. Does he have a draw? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Where do I want my king? I want my king here if I can get it. Let's just shuffle the pieces a little more. Is it a draw because I mouse slipped at a critical moment? He could always just move his bishop back and forth. This is an idea. Sacrifice the pawn with an idea to get back here. The problem with him is he can't defend this f5 pawn with his king. Okay, so I may have to sacrifice this pawn in order to double threats against. And I think the way to do it is to create opposition here. And depending on which way his bishop or his king might just sit there, though. geez. Here, here, here. Takes, possibly takes here, takes here, then here, right? Now he's threatening to queen. I can't get to that diagonal. Or I can just go back here and here. Let's set this up again and look at it. I don't know. I could be losing. I don't know. But now I can at least. It's the wrong color square to queen, but this is a weakness. And let's just reset for a moment to prevent black from getting a bishop down here. Now he's going to try to block my king in. That's clever. I think that's a mistake letting me off the back rank. I'm going to move towards this weakness. I think he's misplaying this. Don't understand that move at all. What's he going to do now? He's going to try to work up problems. I probably should be pushing that. That's nice. Just gonna stay on the diagonal. I think that's the move. I believe this is the move. It's a little scary. Now I'm threatening to go here, which I will execute. His king is on the queening square. I can queen anytime I want to, and I can sacrifice the bishop. Let's hope this is not a mistake. Phew, despite the mouse slip, dropping a whole rook. How do I stop this again? Let's start by getting my queen. I want my queen here. I'll just walk my queen in, I think is what I do. Oh, there's some weird checkmate. Where if he queens and I have a king here, I can checkmate him by being in this spot. I want to put my queen here. Okay, he's probably aware of that now, but this is going to allow me to just kill him. I gotta watch out for the draw. Stalemate. That would be a really disastrous ending. Wow. I was fortunate after blundering my rook, and it's not my fault. It was a mouse slip to win that game. Okay. That was a long one, probably one of my longest ever. Thank you for following, chess fans. We can move on to the next 1900 bot. I got distracted, and I think that's where I got into trouble there. All right, bye-bye.